Hi, my name is Erica Stevens and I am an accredited sports dietitian based in Canberra in Australia. Welcome to the third episode of the Sportrition YouTube channel. Today, the topic of this video is going to be habits, because habits form an integral part of our ability to improve our nutrition, basically. And I'm going to mainly be reviewing a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. This is a great book, so obviously everything in this video is going to be taken mainly from this book. So my first recommendation is to get the book and read it, because there's so much detail in it that obviously I'm not going to go into in a short video. But essentially, I guess probably my favorite quote from the book is that habits are not destiny. So what that means is that we can change our behaviors and change our routines, but we just need to understand why we have habits, how they occur, what sets them off, and why, and I guess what we are rewarded for by going through those habits and potentially changing some of those things so that we can change the behavior part. So I think it's really important to state from the outset that habits can be really useful things. They're not necessarily bad things, although we obviously do have good habits and bad habits, and we tend to be the ones that decide whether we think something's useful for us or not useful for us. But basically the reason why habits can be useful is because it basically allows our brain more time and space for other things. So imagine if you had to consciously every day think about every little thing that you did and acted out. And I guess a good example of this is brushing our teeth. Sometimes that can be almost an automatic behavior. We don't actually have to tend to set reminders on our phones or get our, other people in the family to remind us to brush our teeth. We sort of know at about that time in the evening, after dinner, going to bed, oh yeah, no, I haven't brushed my teeth. And that is a habitual action, basically. So things like that can be really useful. And if you had to actually consciously make that decision every single day, it would be pretty time wasting. So habits can be really, really useful. It's only when we start to detect bad habits or things in our life that we want to change that we realize how difficult it actually is to change our behavior or to change a habit. So in the book, The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg mentions that a scientist has said that the brain doesn't really know the difference between a good habit and a bad habit. So we as individuals have to make decisions about whether we have a behavior that we want to continue and want to maintain, or whether we have a behavior in our day-to-day life that we want to change or want to improve or just want to get rid of altogether. Another quote from the book is, "Habits are powerful but delicate," which tends to suggest that we are very much capable of changing them. If they are delicate, we can manipulate them. And it seems to be, from what I've read in the book, that it's much easier to change a habit and do something else in its place, as opposed to completely getting rid of a habit and completely eliminating a behavior from your day-to-day life. So the big focus of me talking this through with you is, how can we replace one habit with another? Essentially, how a habit plays out is, first and foremost, we get a cue. And this could be really anything. It could be where you happen to be, so the location. It could be what time of day it is. It could be an emotion or a thought that triggers the habit. So we need to first and foremost address the cue, because the behavior or the habit stems from the cue. The third piece in the puzzle is the reward that we get from the cue. The reward we get from the behavior. So once we've acted out the habit or acted out the behavior, we have a reward for it, and this tends to then reinforce that loop, where when we next get that cue, we will act out the behavior because we know the reward is coming. So the more we do something, the reward really is, generally speaking, what is entrenching that habit in our life. So we need to first understand what cue is driving the behavior. What is it that makes that behavior happen each day or each weekend, or however often the habit is happening? So the first thing I tend to get clients to do, if I'm working one-on-one with someone and helping them to change their nutrition habits, for example, I will get them to write down in a journal every time they sense the behaviour about to occur. And I get them to write down a couple of things in particular. So number one, the time of day and the day of the week. So we can have habits that we have during the week and we don't have on the weekend, and that can be really interesting and insightful. The time of day, so whether it's a morning thing or an afternoon thing or an evening thing, and whether it's happening at the same time of day every day. And the third thing I get them to write down is the location. So often a lot of habits are tied to where we are, whether that be in the workplace or at our desk or at home watching TV. So our location and what's around us at that time is the third thing to write down. And the fourth thing that I get people to write down are their thoughts and emotions at that time. So what are they thinking about that might lead to that habit, or how are they feeling and how that emotion might lead to that habit. So getting them to record whether they're thinking about negative things, or they are feeling frustrated or feeling bored in the moment, or something's gone wrong and they're not sure how to deal with it, so some stress. So I get people basically, in order to try to understand the cue of the behaviour, get them to write down those four things in a journal over time. So let's use an example of, I think a common habit that a lot of people have that they report to me is the 3 o'clock need for chocolate. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, feeling a bit flat, feeling a bit tired, and we go for the fundraiser chocolate in the office, or we just go for whatever's in the fridge if we're at home and we're working at home potentially. So essentially the cue might be, let's say it's a workplace, so we have the location is work, the time of day is 3 o'clock, and we have maybe fatigue or a lack of energy at 3 in the afternoon is what people are experiencing at that point in the day. The behaviour or the habit is to go and get some chocolate, and we have that, and the reward is very momentarily a feeling of euphoria or a feeling of things are okay, or just a moment without thinking essentially, which eating can give us a bit of time out essentially from our day. So that's a bit of an example of how you might record all that and try to understand that behaviour a little bit better. And if people start to see that every day, Monday to Friday, in the workplace at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, they have a feeling of low energy, that's all the cues, and it's leading to a behaviour of eating chocolate, and they particularly want to change that behaviour. That doesn't mean that chocolate is inherently a bad thing and that we should never eat it, but potentially these people that I'm referring to want to do that less, or don't want that behaviour to be so automatic. They want to have a little bit more choice about the matter, about whether they consume chocolate or not. So the way we change that behaviour, so we've now understood the behaviour and understood the habit, and we've broken it down into what's causing the habit and what we're getting out of acting out the habit. So if we want to change that behaviour that sits between the cue and the reward, one of the easiest things to change, or probably the best thing to change in that instance, is the middle part. So we need to find a behaviour or a habit that gives us the same reward that the chocolate was giving us, because usually we can't change the cue. 3 o'clock Monday to Friday in the office is always going to happen. We can't get away from that unless we stop working. So we can't necessarily change the cue unless, of course, there are some strong emotions or strong thoughts happening, and whether that can be worked on. And usually psychology is a good place to go with working on thoughts and emotions that are difficult to deal with. So let's just presume we don't have anything that's very complicated in that realm, but that we just have this cue of workplace 3 o'clock low energy, and that seems to be driving the behaviour. We need to get a feeling, a reward from a different behaviour that mimics what chocolate gives us. So that could be, for example, the fact that we feel a little bit more energy when we have some sweet things and feel a little bit better as soon as we have it. And we have a little bit of time off work while we go and look for the chocolate and sit and enjoy the chocolate. So what else can we do that gives us that same sense of potentially a bit of a break from work and a bit of a increase in energy? And a couple of things that you can do that I know that have worked for people is to actually just take a break from work at that point. So if you've been at work since 9 o'clock that morning, or 8:30 or 8 o'clock or 7, some people start very early, it's not unreasonable to get to that point and feel mentally fatigued, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And all that it might take is a bit of a walk outside, 5 minutes, get outside, get some sun in your eyes, some fresh air. Take a moment, have some mindfulness, don't think about work while you're outside, and then come back to your desk and reset. So it allows you to have a break without the excuse of eating something. And I think often we use eating something as an excuse to actually stop working. And I don't think we need to have an excuse to have a mental break, particularly when it's a couple of minutes, you walk outside and come back in again. I don't think we need to be eating in order to justify that break. So the next thing that people need to do is to practice some of these things. So the first time you do it, it's not necessarily going to work, and it's not necessarily going to stop the chocolate craving or the desire to go and have the chocolate anyway. You might think, oh yeah, well I went outside, had a bit of a break, and then I came back and had a bit of chocolate anyway. That's okay. This is not a quick fix. This is something that we do need to practice. Same as anything in life, if we want to get better at it, the more we do it, the more automatic it becomes, and then it becomes a new habit. So that's what's really cool about this book, The Power of Habit. It goes through the loop of showing how the cue affects the behaviour and gives us a certain reward. And if we can change, in particular, the behaviour and slot a different behaviour in there that gives us the same reward, that really can be one of the biggest keys to behaviour change. So in essence, what this book really showed me was that habits are actually really, really useful things if they're good and if they're habits that we want to keep continuing. The other thing I learned is that we can change habits, but it does take effort and it does take time and it does take a little bit of experimentation. But there's a lot of empowerment in that, to know that we are in control of what that behaviour is. And I do hear a lot of people say to me that they have an addiction to chocolate or an addiction to sweet things. And I think it can be useful to think about that a little bit differently, and know and understand that if you have something sweet or have chocolate every afternoon, that's a very entrenched habit, and our brain is expecting that sugar reward every day, essentially. That doesn't mean it's an addiction, and I think addiction is a very strong word that applies to a lot of other things in life. But understanding that the brain has come to expect something doesn't necessarily mean we can't change that. I think lastly, I do want to reiterate that there's absolutely nothing wrong with eating chocolate at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We don't have to completely get rid of that behaviour, but I do know that for some people they find it really, I guess, troubling to feel a bit out of control with their nutrition habits. And I think having an understanding of this brings an element of control to people, and then they are more conscious going into the afternoon and can make decisions based on the day and how they feel, and whether they really do want the chocolate or whether it's just habit that's driving them over to the cupboard or to the desk drawer. And so to be able to know that you can make a conscious decision in that situation, I think is really empowering. And then to have some skills and some ideas from this book about how to then change that, I hope that's been really, really useful for some of you watching. So that's it for today's episode on habit, and in particular a bit of a review of the book called The Power of Habit. I have put a link to this book in the notes below the video, so you can click on a link and purchase the book if you want to. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.